Cheers. Welcome to Six Sips. What's up, guys? This is Peter, Chad, and myself, Sid. We're here. Have a lot to talk about today. I want to hand it off to Peter, though, for a second, bounce off Chad, and then we'll intro what we're going to actually be talking about. Cool.
Hey, guys. We're glad to have you guys at the Six Sips virtual, first ever virtual Six Sips session. That was weird. Anyways, Sid and I were kind of sales guys. I both trained in the field, both spent some time under Chad's leadership and his training, learning how to do a sonic inspection and make sure that we're giving the best service to our clients. But I wanted to tee it off to Chad. You may have seen him in our previous video, the Testimony Tuesday we did. But Chad, tell us who you are and like kind of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, nice to meet you guys. I wanted to jump in and join your guys' little video testimonies and your Six Sips coffee talks. So
that name has changed every single video.
Hey, whatever name we want to come up with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to jump on here and join the conversation with you guys and kind of tell you what we do and what I do. So I'm just the operations manager and one of the field engineers. So I've been doing this since 2011. We've been doing these 5 years since 2013-14. We started a 5-year program out in Oklahoma City in 2014, and we've just been hitting the ground running. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is the reason for the 5-year and kind of what we do and what we've seen out there. So
boom. Well, we're talking about 5 years. If you guys didn't know, we have a lot to talk about 5 years. You'll probably see this broken out probably into like 3-4 videos. Don't know yet, but Chad, will you hit us off? Or I guess Peter, you have questions too. I'm going to open this up. Let's talk about the 5-year inspections, and this should be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, I'll just give a brief kind of. The full name of these inspections, these assessments, is the 5-year internal assessment, and there are technically 2 of them. You may just have like one on your, if you're just getting a bill from your contractor, you'll just see maybe the 5-year listed there. There are technically a 5-year internal pipe assessment and a 5-year internal valve assessment, and they're separate.
Yep.
And Chad's going to dive in because he's been in the field, he's done these inspections, he's been alongside contractors doing their part and our part. So Chad, let's start with what is the intent of a 5-year internal assessment?
The intent is to make sure the system is operational, see the integrity of it, and to look for any inorganic or organic foreign material. So your mick, your corrosion, your sediment, your sludge, your wall attachment, your scaling, your foreign obstruction, things that come from the water mains, rocks, dirt, action figures, all types of things that can make its way through. But there's a purpose of the check valves and all the other type of piping, and the reason for the 5 years to make sure there's nothing inorganic in there that could obstruct the system from operational.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. With the hope, obviously, that thing is going to do what it's supposed to do in the event of a fire. We're trying to make sure that those systems are operational, right, Sid?
Yeah, and I was going to really important to point out, like the 5-year function is to look at the operation side, like that check valve, and I think this is going to hit into actually, Chad, let's talk about this. What is the difference between a 5-year pipe inspection and a 5-year check valve?
So the difference would be the check valve is literally they just have to drain the system down and take apart the check valve and do their internal assessment, take some pictures, clean off the clamper, make sure everything's operational, nothing foreign or broken in there, replace the gasket if needed. And then that's pretty much it. They're going to take a picture, they're going to put the faceplate back on or put the valve back in, the piping, make sure, put it together, hope it seals up and doesn't leak, and fill the system back up. Then the internal piping would be the 3 main areas that they want on the piping would be the riser, the cross main, and a branch line. So you're going to you're going to test all those 3 locations and internally.
So I guess walk me through what would be the difference between like a visual inspection, a video inspection, and a NDT inspection for the 5-year on the piping side, because I think it's important for us to kind of like walk through what's the difference between them.
So the main difference would be everything but the non-destructive testing is invasive. You have to take the system down and either visually inspect with your eyes, a phone, a scope, a camera. Those are all invasive. You have to take the system down. It's not live. You have to break open pipe. You have to insert in objects. You have to use your eyes. Or the non-destructive would be the system stays live. It's not taken down, and there's no disruption to the service or anything else of the system. You don't have to mess with the alarms. You don't have to mess with fire watch. You don't have to mess with anything. All those annoyances that come with the 5-year internal of manually and invasively taking a system down. So that's the big main difference.
Well, and I want to ask, well, so a lot of people will say, well, visually we get to see what's going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
What's the response to that? Because that's why people like visual inspections. They're like, well, I know I can see now what's really going on there. Like, why would I want to do a non-destructive testing inspection versus visual?
Well, with the non-destructive, we can give you data that you cannot see with your eyes. We can tell you the integrity of the piping. We tell you the wall thickness of the piping. We can also find the actual true internal assessment of the system because it's live. Your wet systems, there are going to be some trapped air in there sometimes, so we can actually see that live and in person. Why it's this area's got trapped air. We might want to address this area. You drain the system down. You don't have the clearest vision of what the internal system is truly like when it's operational. So that would be, and then you're relying on somebody's eyes that could be not the best, or you're relying on a camera that's not. I've seen pictures of internals before, and they're sometimes not the cleanest pictures, and you only get to see maybe a 6-inch section of the pipe before it gets pitch black dark, and they're not really seeing too much farther down in the piping. So with the non-invasive, you can test all up and down that piping without you get a bunch of data points on that.
Chad, out of curiosity, have you seen, and if something doesn't come to mind, you can just say that, but have you seen something where like a guy maybe would have passed that visually, but you saw data with our technology that would have said, hey, this is actually cause for further assessment or concern?
I don't think in that scenario because I don't ever mess with the manual side. We don't ever get to see a lot of the manual internal side. So I don't have a case study where one guy said this is what the internal was, and that guy said the other internal was.
But Peter, to that question, we have done assessments and people have opened up the section of this pipe where we said it is a concern and it is fully obstructed. And so I think there's proof in the pudding, obviously. like we've been doing this for 17 years, and the 5 years we've been doing since 2013, as we said. So we're hitting almost 10 years on that too. And Chad, I asked you those questions earlier because I was looking at like the visual inspections. It's not as much of it's not looking at the integrity of the pipe, right? Like it's just, is it obstructed? If it keeps the function, it's good, right? Where the sonic inspection is, hey, is the integrity of the pipe good? Is it holding up? Is the metal actually deteriorating? There's a lot more integrity assessment there for the purpose of the system rather than just focusing on the function. And I would say that's the biggest difference between like a visual or video inspection versus a sonic inspection, which focuses on, for us, is it's all about the integrity of the system. It's not about the function of the system, because if the integrity of the system is upheld, it's not going to function properly.
Right. That's a good point. So Chad, out of curiosity, you have been alongside a lot of our contractor friends and people that we work with a lot. And even, Sid, you probably have some statements here too about like just what you've heard from people when you're talking about the 5-year. What is actually being offered in the industry today? Is it like what everyone dreams a 5-year is, or is there some discrepancy maybe between like what's being described in code and what's being offered today? Like you guys either one can jump in on that.
I've seen the discrepancy between, contractor A versus contractor B of how they do their internal valves. Some will do all of the internal valves. Some will only do one of the internal valves. That's the discrepancy I've seen before. So that would be like, there's just different contractors doing different things out there. I would assume that they are also doing that on the piping version too. It's what's accessible, what's easy to access, instead of going maybe truly by the code of going to the end of the system or going to the best practice areas of a wet system, and you have a high pitch system where there most likely is areas of trapped air. Well, that would be a good place to test, instead of going to test the 8-foot cross main that's off your 8-foot ladder that's easy to access and you can get in and out. You're not truly
Yeah.
giving them an understanding of the internal assessment, because that not only is it operational, it is an assessment of the system, because you only do this every 5 years. So if
Yeah.
you're just avoiding the hard to reach places because you don't want to do it, you're not really giving an assessment of the areas that have the highest concern.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like when we talk about 5 years, Peter, a 5 years of minimal compliancy. It's getting a C in school to pass and get through. And that is like what we're doing every 5 years. So it really shouldn't be this as quote unquote burdensome or as people think or perceive. I really think this should be, hey, we just do it because it needs to be done. I think that comes into play. Like I think there's a lot of factors into this 5 years not being a priority for a lot of people. From the top of like you have your AHJs who aren't pushing it. You have NFPA who has said, yeah, we should do it, but you have your AHJs who are over these areas and they're not pushing it, which that's part of it. But then you also have buyer contractors who are supposed to help their end users understand what standards and codes they should be following, and if they're not pushing it either. And then you have building owners who just aren't as educated about fire. They have so many things that they're worrying about from running their business. Their focus isn't on, hey, is my building compliant or not? And so I think there's a lot of issues that are leading, honestly, a lot of like safety concerns for me when I think about the 5 years, because I mean, this is minimal compliancy. This is the only time that we're inspecting for the integrity of the pipe if there's obstruction. So if there is a fire, it's going to put it out, and that's the hope. And I think the 5 years should be something that people start talking about more as just a minimal compliancy side. Like it shouldn't be this huge, oh, I got to get my 5 years done. But I think it's been that way because of the time it takes for a 5 year to be done traditionally, the invasiveness of that. And that's
The risk.
The risk. Yeah, the risk.
Here's another example. I've been on site where we do these in tandem 5 years where the contractor's doing the valving and we're doing the piping, internal piping assessment. And his normal operation, you open up a drain to drain the system down, and then you're going to take it apart. Well, if your drains that your floor drain that you're draining into isn't operational or it's clogged, and then it starts to flood the area that he's trying to drain, that just puts another hamper and delay in the time that they're on site, the cleanup. It's just, again, nobody likes to do these internal pipe assessments invasively because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of risk, and a lot of liability. And everything is not your brand new system where it's easy to take apart and fill up and easy to access. You got your older systems that they didn't really think about too much of having access to the sprinkler piping. It's tucked away in a hard to reach area, so that would give another reason for somebody not to inspect that area, because it's too hard to manually get up there and actually physically open up the pipe. So I've seen a bunch of different scenarios of why it's such a burdensome or so hard of getting these 5 years done. So it needs to be done. It needs to be addressed.
Sid, to your point a little bit as well, like on the element of like minimal compliance, this is kind of getting the C in school. Like we do need to give some credit to these guys. There are so many systems in the US that have to be inspected that
There's so many.
it's and even tracking it. This is maybe embarrassing for some of the industry guys, but like we've been on paper reports for years still. Like there still are like municipalities that are relying on a paper system, like an actual file cabinet. And with the advent of these electronic methods of tracking these things, there are now some automated services that are sort of like catching us now in this act of like, oh, not in the act because they're not committing a crime, but like catching us in, this moment of like, oh shoot, this building has been non-compliant or uninspected for a long time, and now they're getting an automated letter in the mail saying, hey, you're not compliant. And then their contractor and even their AHJs have to now go back and go, hey, we're working on catching up. But there's just been this like backlog, where it's almost logistically been hard to do. And that's, we did a video a few weeks ago about how efficient our technology is.
Mm-hmm. I think
a system's done in a day compared to a contractor's 1 to 3, and depending on how many guys they've got on site and how long they're working and what they've got to work with. But the compliance side is a big conversation because there's just so much in it,
And even when we've done these numbers, it's like in Arizona, there should be 45,000 5 years every year. Just in Arizona alone. And you got to think like Arizona's fairly big, but you start thinking about New York, LA, all these other places, like they're probably up in the 100,000s that need to be done every year. but it's again, there's so much to do, and it makes sense why no one's been pushing it. No one's wanted. No one's had access to get these done. There's not enough people, not enough inspectors out there to go get this done. And so, and kind of going back to like what I've seen offered in the industry, because we Chad, you said, yeah, it's different from contractor to contractor, even on the check valve. Well, something I've seen from, I mean, New York to LA, even in LA, they don't do the internal pipe inspection. So they just do a check valve. And then out here in Arizona, a good portion of companies just do check valve inspections. That is what I've come to find out when talking with them. I say, hey, well, do you do the pipe? And a lot of them are like, we pipe inspections. I didn't know that was required, or we just don't do it. And so then it comes into like, a lot of people are receiving pricing, or they're receiving services that are technically not fully compliant. And it's a weird gap that we've just seen in the industry. I don't know, like, I
think that goes back to this educational, the compliancy, having these tools of these newer compliance engines, being able to automate this, tracking all of this. Another example of just doing these 5 years and working with contractors or working with the end users. I've never done this before. Nobody's ever said I've had to do this before. Back to the enforcement, back to the contractors not offering it or even knowing how to do it. I've had contractors before ask me, how do I do this internal piping? I know how to do the valve, but we just don't ever do the piping. There's this disconnect of what a true 5-year internal assessment program, partial to the full piping valve, to all inclusive, but it all comes back down to education, compliance, and enforcement type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think what's important for our listeners, just in case you're like kind of lost in this, like this depth of conversation we're having, the questions that you should be asking are like, what is being inspected? What is required, actually, is a better question first. And then even just asking your contractor, like, hey, like, are you doing my cross mains and my branch lines? Are you like what does your assessment look like? Not to try and catch them in the act. We're not trying to be these like, we're not whistleblowers by any means, but we're just trying to say like your building, the only time that this is ever done is on a 5-year cycle. There's no other test that I'm aware of, at least. Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no other test that looks for corrosion and obstruction in a sprinkler system. We've had too many systems. Even recently, there have been buildings caught fire that have burned down, and the comment has been from the AHJ, the system didn't activate, or it failed to put out the fire to control it like it was supposed to. And that's a problem. That's like that's why this is so important. Sid, what do you got?
Well, so I was going to say, I would say the only thing I could think of that people would say that counts as a potential 5-year can suffice for it is a flow test. But again,
standpipe flow test,
a standpipe flow test. But again, like that's just checking the function of the system. It's not checking the integrity of the system. It's saying, hey, it flows. That's great, but we don't know if it's obstructed. It could be obstructed, and they can say, well, it's 10% or 15% slower than what it should be. So we know that there's something blocking. Okay, that works, but again, it's not looking at the integrity, and it's just reacting to, okay, now this is bad, and gets back into reactive maintenance. Wow, we're full circle again.
Sure, and that also, that flow test is only going to incorporate into the standpipe. You still have your floor control valve sectional systems where the actual piping that's going to put out a fire. The supply is a main concern, but if your piping that feeds the sprinkler heads and the branch lines and the sprinkler heads that put out the fire obstructed or not even being tested, what does you no good just to rely on your flow test as your hey, this is operational, this is good to go.
Well, Chad, you make a good point, and this is actually, sorry, Sid, I'm going to cut you off, but there's a stipulation in the code that says, and it's only technically for dry systems, but it's important to state that basically if you're doing a flow test or a trip test, they'll call it for dry systems, and there's usually a drain at the end of the system, and you've got to try and inspect the branch line adjacent to that, because that's technically the furthest point of the system where there's no way for that water to go anywhere, and that's where your obstruction is most likely to occur. And so there are stipulations in the code looking to address some of these things, but it's first of all, it's not for wet systems. There's not a stipulation like that for a wet system in the code. And secondly, it doesn't account for what about the second or third branch lines that are adjacent to that inspector test valve. They might also have obstruction material. Like there are just so many, like it's the balance of not trying to burden the end user with too much cost, which is a real thing. It can't just, require you to spend $1 million every 5 years or whatever the number would be. But like we do have to assure compliance. And that's something that like a non-invasive sonic inspection, we can test multiple areas a lot more cleanly, a lot more quickly, with like less disruption to the end user.
Yeah. Well, and again, like it comes back to no matter whether you use us or a fire contractor for visual or video, like because those are really the only 3 inspections you can get. We talked about ultrasound and how there's different types of ultrasound that don't work for internal investigations. And so when we look at this, like for the 5-year compliancy, it's really just looking at the components required by NFPA, which is that it's a riser, cross main, branch line that get inspected. And so no matter what, whether you have a sonic inspection, a visual inspection, or a video inspection, you're going to get an assessment of the riser, the cross main, and the branch line. And that's just the minimal compliancy side of it. So it's, I think when you were talking about wanting to do, well, what about the second branch line, the third branch line, the fourth? I think that's where, we have to, or building owners have to leverage, well, do I want to know more integrity of my system, or do I just want to have minimal compliancy? So it's like, do I just want to, and that's their decision. It's their risk, their liability. And I think it's important to note here is all of this liability falls back on the building owner, facility manager. That's something that's not talked about very frequently. And it's the idea of, ignorance of the standards and codes is not legal defense. This is a quote from Siemens in one of their brochures that they recently released. I was like, wow, that was so blatantly out there. But when you look at NFPA code, it all puts it back on the building owner and facility manager. It's not the insurance company's job to make sure that you're keeping up on your compliance. They'll try to help, but at the end of the day, if there's a fire and catastrophic failure, they're not going to try to pay out if they don't want to. They're going to look for flaws that you didn't do. On another sense, the HJ, the government's never going to pay out. It's always, they're going to push it back onto the building owner. And then it comes to the fire contractor. Now, there could be proof that they didn't do something correctly. Something could happen, but at the end of the day, typically that's not what happens. It all falls back on the end user. And I think it's really important to note that like you as a building owner, you as a facility manager have to take ownership of your building. You have to take ownership of these fire sprinkler systems, because if there's a catastrophic failure, there's the fire in Oakland that happened in 2013. Pretty much the fire marshal couldn't come and inspect the building. The fire contractor didn't know that the 5 years needed to be done, wasn't forcing it. It came out that there was 13 people that had died from this fire, and it fell all back on that building owner. It wasn't, they didn't try anything. It was, hey, this is the building owner's fault. And so I think that is just one story of probably thousands of stories of, hey, this falls back on the building owners, the facility managers. And I think it's really important that you guys know, at least have some concepts of I know these people are trying to take in like this much, like drinking out of a fire hydrant, of this is all the information I have to do for compliancy. And so it's just important to know, like, to find information sources, to have a little bit of education on this. And that's what we hope we're providing you guys here, which is, hey, this is what a 5 year is. This is an in-depth discussion about the 5 years. Why is this important to do?
Right.
So
yeah, to recap, like 5 years are the only time that your system is inspected for things that hinder the functional operation of the system in the event of a fire, like corrosion, obstruction, blockage, scaling, and things like that. It's minimally required at a 5 year frequency, mostly because they're trying to balance how quickly do these things corrode versus how much is too much of a burden on the end user. And I think, Sid, that conversation about like liability and who's going to pay for it at the end of the day is really important, because it's tempting when you have 1,000 codes to follow as a building owner or facility manager. This one that you've like not really heard about maybe doesn't seem very important. But if it's life safety, like the 5 year is a life safety issue, and it's directly like it's vital to functional operation of fire sprinkler systems, it's something that, like, at the end of the day, you just don't want to risk it. You don't want to take the chance of like, I didn't get it done in time and something went wrong. And that's our goal, is to talk about, like, this is maybe a neglected inspection, but it's a vital one.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great summary of that. And I think it's also really important, just another aspect of this conversation, which is building owners and facility managers can have a risk assessment done of their facility in lieu of the 5 years. That's another option for them. Like I was like, we're going to talk about this. There, if they were to find a service or an offering where they're going through more of the piping, or they're going through to do these things, that can be offered in lieu of the 5-year. And so I think, and that's also if they're doing system redesign, if they're opening up a good portion of that pipe to redesign the system, that can count as the 5-year because they're inspecting, they're looking inside that. And so for you guys, that's another way of doing these 5 years. If you know that you're going to be doing an improvement on your system, that year, you can count that for the 5-year. That's part of it. And I know a lot of contractors push that too, because it's like, if we're going to be opening it, we're going to be draining it, let's just do it. Let's just get it done that way. Now there's other types, like you can get into life cycle asset management programs. That can be where, like for Sonic, that's we go in, we assess a good portion of that system, not everything, but what is substantial to help us understand where's the condition of that system at. You can have video inspections that go further. There's people who do video inspections to identify corrosion and stuff, and then go through and can use that in lieu of a 5-year. So I think it's important that you guys have that knowledge, have those ideas of what could be a better practice than a 5-year, and implement that as your 5-year practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Chad, did you have any closing thoughts before we kind of round out this conversation of 5 years?
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I would also say, again, about we touched on earlier about not requiring proof, but don't be afraid to ask your contractors exactly where your areas of piping is being inspected. Ask for some actual visual confirmation, or our report is very in depth, and we can give you that as well.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point, Chad, because there's this, like some ambiguity about like how do you know which part of your system was inspected, and like where was that cross main reading taken or whatever else. And like, not that we're not assuming that they're not doing it by any means. We're assuming the best of these contractors, that they're probably doing their best. But like at the end of the day, like whatever's most accessible, especially like on a wet system, if you're in a hospital and it's behind an HVAC system, you're not going to get to that. You're going to get, where it's a bit easier down, or maybe it's in a stairwell somewhere. Whereas with our technology, it's literally the size of like it's a little bit thicker than my phone, but it's small enough we can get into places that people can't get. And there is a difference between like most accessible and code compliant.
Sure. I would also say part of this too, back to, your system is going to be, you're going to have your sprinkler system for hopefully a long time. So this 5-year cycle is going to be a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year. So you'd like to assess how your system is changing every 5 years. So if you have a detailed reporting record, hey, this is the piping that was inspected this time, and then this was inspected again at this cycle, so you can start to compare. So that's why just requesting a little bit more of a understanding or a standard of what how your system 5 years actually being done, make sure that it's compliant, make sure they're doing everything that's required, and then also you, for your own knowledge and for your own benefit, to know how that system is being assessed over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I want to jump back one more time. Sorry, just keep the conversation going. When we talk about proof of these inspections, it's when I think about a Sonic inspection, it's consistent. It will always be the same amount of points. And that's where consistency is going to allow for that information to then be best used. So it's not like we'll do 6 assessments at one system and 4 in another, where potentially, like, because we have such set standards and boundaries of what we have to operate within, it's repeatable. And I think repeatable inspections should be a focus for facility managers. And I think that's a really cool like nuance that Sonic is bringing to this industry, where I think with like traditional services, like specific visual or video, you're getting different amounts of information, and even from there, it's still a subjective call on whether that is good or bad. And so I think it's not as repeatable. Like with a technology side, we can stick 30,000 different people with the same unit, and it's going to provide the same amount of information. Whereas if you stick 30,000 people doing visual inspections, that you could get 30,000 different answers. You'll probably get one of 3 answers, which is it's good, it's bad, or it's okay. Like that's like you'll get one of 3, but like for Sonic, it's hey, this pipe is good, this pipe is bad. It's just, or like hey, this has trapped water. Like it's the data side, and I think that's what's really unique about a Sonic inspection is that a word, repeatability? I don't think it is.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Just doesn't sound good in my head.
And it gives your facility
being, like,
it gives your facility managers like what to expect. I'm going to get this same service provided every 5 years. If we need a lift in this area, we know this always needs a lift to get access into this area. We're always going to be testing this area. So they're able to plan and prepare for these type of inspections when you have like a standard, repeatable type of inspection assessment, where you know what you're getting, you know what to expect, and it's not like a surprise every time or something different.
Yeah.
Well, and physics doesn't lie. Like that's the thing I always come back to as like for the 5 year, like our technology is based in the acoustical physics of carbon steel, and it doesn't lie. Like there's not a way that you could get two dramatically different readings off the same pipe in the same moment. Like it's going to be unless your guy doesn't know what he's doing, but like assuming that you have a well-trained engineer, which all of our people, Chad is ruthless, and I can attest to this. There have been times I'm scanning, I'm like, I'm getting this, and he'll like grab it and touch the same pipe, and it's dramatically better, and I'm like, okay, I got to start all over. So he's trained me, and he's trained Sid, he's trained everybody else to be really good at this. But as long as you're basing it in the physics of the actual sound waves going through steel, that's not going to change.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody's visual inspection, that could change based on 1,000 things. Maybe you have a different contractor this year than you had last year or 5 years ago. It doesn't matter. You could have somebody else with our technology come in. Well, no one else has our technology, but assuming someone else comes up with the same idea, doing the same test, it's going to be the same physics, the same response, no matter what.
Well, and I think that leads in for us, which is one day we hope that this can be a new discipline within the industry. I think ending the conversation here, which is, I mean, we can keep going, but this idea of we would love to see a sonic inspection be used at every facility because the technology's out there. I think long term, like that's a sonic mentality, a sonic thought, which is within our company blood, which is giving access, giving people, fire contractors, facilities, the access to this technology one day because it's so vital for system integrity and safety for people in those buildings, the occupants. And so I think, Peter, as you said, like one day there is going to be a day where our hope is it is just a sonic inspection. And that's the new norm because we've seen it. I mean, we've proven it for 17 years. This stuff makes sense. People want it. The customer bases that we have, from nursing homes to names I can't mention, and DoD sites and stuff like that. Like it's been proven. And I think when this hits the market at some point, whenever that we choose that to be, our goal is to see a new discipline created. So now you can go to OSU or Maryland and get trained in guided wave, and you can leave that college, or you can go to a place and get trained just in guided wave and not have to go to college. Or we can create a new trade for people to do in these inspections for life safety services. I think that would be long term. That's the goal.
Like that's the passion of our company. Yeah, go for it, Chad.
And that's just the way the world is changing, and the technology and the benefits, and using all these tools instead of relying on the old-fashioned way, and being able to create a new expertise for the fire contractor industry, all the way down to your service guy, where he could go out there and be doing 5-year internals. And I guarantee everybody that I talk to that does 5-year internal manually versus what we do sonic inspection wise, they would take the sonic inspection route any day, twice on Sundays, and they would love to start using that as their way of doing internal assessments.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, guys, we should probably cut it somewhere around here. We're kind of running into we're talking all day.
Yeah, no, let's quick recap. So 5 years. So 5-year, Chad, basic of a 5-year. What is it? Wrap it up. You have
5-year internal assessment of the valve and the riser piping, the cross main piping, and the branch line piping to make sure it's operational, check the integrity, and look for any obstructions. Fantastic.
Love it. All right. Sweet. Well, guys, that was our 5-year conversation that almost lasted 5 years. Please join us again. This is probably definitely going to be broken out into many videos, but thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys find this as educational as we hope it is. And if you do have questions, feel free to comment. We'd love to answer those, and even just reach out. Our goal is to provide education about these types of services within the fire industry and how we can hope to see trends changed from traditional to innovative inspections over the next course of the few years. And so thank you, Chad. Thank you, Peter, for jumping on this phone call, video call, and sweet. Cheers from 6 Sips with empty coffee now.
Empty coffee now. Cheers.
All right. Hey, thank you guys.
Another cup.